Appreciate it. Thanks. Have a great night. Merry Christmas.
Absolutely.
Look, for several days now, ICE has been releasing hundreds of migrant asylum seekers into a public park in El Paso, Texas, with apparently no plan for taking care of them. Fox Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt joins us now with more.
Good evening, Tammy. In all, several hundred migrants were released in El Paso, Texas from the weekend to Christmas Day without ICE apparently giving the usual advance notice to shelters and other groups that offer help to the migrants. Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke was among those greeting the migrants as they mulled their next move on Christmas Day.
ICE admitted that they dropped the ball, that they made a mistake yesterday by not giving the community any kind of heads up on releasing 214 migrants at the Greyhound bus station last night and early this morning.
And activists who usually coordinate with ICE were also caught unawares.
We're a little perplexed because this is not something that ICE typically does.
In a statement, ICE blamed, quote, decades of inaction by Congress for limiting its ability to detain and promptly remove families in the United States illegally, and went on, quote, to mitigate the risk of holding family units past the time frame allotted to the government, ICE has curtailed reviews of post-release plans from families apprehended along the southwest border. That statement obviously doesn't directly address the situation in El Paso over the last couple of days, but it did also say, quote, ICE is redoubling its efforts to work with local and state officials and NGO partners in the area so they are prepared to provide assistance with transportation or other services. Now, Tammy, it's not clear whether the lack of communication between ICE and the shelter organizations is being affected by the government shutdown, but it is worth noting that many ICE staffed deemed non-essential are not working right now. Tammy?
Yeah, well, Jonathan, thank you. At the same time, wouldn't you agree, though, that certainly the Customs and Border Patrol is swamped and that ICE is swamped? We've got, they're releasing hundreds right now into El Paso, but we're dealing with thousands of people who clearly they're releasing them based on the Family Separation Act, that they are just overwhelmed at this point, regardless of...
You're absolutely right, Tammy. You talk to any agents who work the border area, and that is exactly the kind of word that they would use, that they are overwhelmed. One other point that I think is interesting, it's not at all clear that all of these who've been released in El Paso were asylum seekers. Some of them may simply have been illegal immigrants.
Right.
That points to catch and release taking place. That, of course, is something that President Trump says it doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, so obviously more work to do. Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for that report. Now, Chris Kobach is the Kansas Secretary of State. He joins us now. Chris, you are a man. You know, you've been working on this for quite some time, for years. You know what the situation is. This is not unfamiliar to you either. Can you give us a sense, really, as people might want to blame the shutdown, but this is really chaos that is unfolding, and an overwhelmed Customs and Border Protection Force, overwhelmed ICE perhaps, because they're contained, if you will, by certain court decisions about what they can and cannot do. What do you think is going on in El Paso now, and should the people there be concerned about what's happening?
Well, first of all, you're correct when you suggest this is not because of the government shutdown. Enforcement and removal operations of ICE, that's the division that handles this type of duty, they're essential employees. They're working at full steam regardless of the shutdown. There might be some public affairs officers who normally, contact the press and things like that who might not be working, but it's not caused by the shutdown. Secondly, although the numbers this week in El Paso are large and larger than normal, people should be aware that there are, if you look nationally, thousands of people being released into the United States who are asylum seekers, not necessarily worthy of asylum, but claiming that they are, every month. And so this is a big problem. Here, this number should shock you. In the last 5 years, the number of asylum claims in the United States system has gone up 2,000%. There are almost 800,000 asylum cases pending in our immigration courts. And the vast majority of those are not legitimate. It's estimated that these Central American claims, well over 90%, are going to be denied. They're not even close to being a legitimate claim of asylum. Asylum requires that your government back home is persecuting you and you have a well-founded fear of being hurt because of your membership in a particular social group, whereas these people are coming in saying, well, I've got gangs in my neighborhood. And so this asylum loophole has become a massive loophole that is causing a huge problem for the whole system. So it is a big problem. This is just a symptom.
And we're letting these people out, of course, presuming they'll come back. This is the old game to get their court hearing, and then they just never show up. But we also learned a couple weeks ago from Secretary Nielsen of the Department of Homeland Security that we have an arrangement with Mexico now that they would hold people who are looking for asylum until we can adjudicate them. Do you think that's really going to happen, or do you think that we're still is the president still going to have to go and try to get this done through the courts, which clearly seem to be resistant to him being able to control the border?
Well, a little of both. So I think that what Secretary Nielsen announced last week is a big first. It's not a first step. It's a big step in the right direction for those people who haven't yet crossed into the United States. But most of the people we're talking about here in El Paso, they were already in the United States when they were apprehended, many of them anyway. And for those people, what DHS needs to do right away is to finalize a proposed regulation that they promulgated back in September, and that regulation will override what's called the Flores settlement, which is why we're releasing all these people, and allow the detention of complete family units together until their case is adjudicated finally.
Chris,
and we've got to get that done right away, and there's no time to waste.
Yeah, because that's a